There was an eerie silence in that Abbottabad compound on the evening of May 1st, 2011, after the shots rang out. The most revered U.S. military special ops, the U.S. Navy SEALs, had assassinated the most wanted man in the world, the emir of Al Qaeda, the hero of the 1979 Afghan Civil War, and a man who was suspected of being behind the worst terrorist attacks in U.S. history on September 11, 2001, Osama bin Laden. Vice Admiral William McRaven ordered the team to take the body out of the compound and fly it back to the USS Carl Vinson, waiting for the team to return from their mission off the Persian Gulf. Just like that, in the dead of night, the will of the wisp character that escaped every intelligence agency in the world was gone. His carcass dumped into the dark recesses of the North Arabian Sea. Without its enigmatic leader, Al Qaeda seemed to lack any emphasis for future attacks. Or did it? By 2011, there was a new terrorist organization led by a more shrewd and insular leader. The Islamic State of Iraq had just regrouped out of Tikrit, Iraq, and into Damascus, Syria. The country was under a civil war with the Bashir al-Assad government and its Alawite regime. Abu Omar al-Baghdadi had inherited the ultra-Orthodox sect from his predecessor and founder of the Islamic State, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Al-Zarqawi from Jordan had named it originally the Jabhat al-Tawhid wal-Jihad in 1999, where he met with bin Laden in Afghanistan, and it was through his previous upbringing from his family that he fermented his hatred for Jews, and more so, Shia Muslims, who he managed to call munafiq, or fake. On his first meeting with bin Laden, al-Zarqawi reportedly declared Shiites should be executed. Bin Laden thought of al-Zarqawi as too rigid, as well as too volatile, but he had some use for his former pimp and drug dealer. Al-Zarqawi had plans of his own to topple King Abdullah from Jordan and implement an Islamic caliphate. Before the year's end, however, al-Zarqawi's plot, which was involved in a much bigger transnational terrorist operation named Millennium Plot, where terrorist cells inside Amman, Jordan, led by Zarqawi and Louis Sakra, were to bomb 4 locations: the Radisson Hotel, Mount Nebo, which was a Christian site, the border between Jordan and Israel, and the site near the Jordan River where it was said that John the Baptist baptized Jesus Christ. The plot foiled when Jordanian intelligence got wind of the plot through a phone call from an al-Qaeda operative, Abu Zubaydah, who spoke with Qadir Abu Hoshar, a Palestinian immigrant. Al-Zarqawi and Sakra fled the country and were charged in absentia for their involvement. He traveled to Pakistan, where his visa became revoked, and then he traveled into Afghanistan, where he would once again meet with Osama bin Laden in Kabul and Kandahar. Al-Zarqawi asked bin Laden to help him fund for a training camp in Herat, located in the western part of the country. Bin Laden saw potential and gave him a small donation of $200,000 to help start his operation. With this donation, al-Zarqawi got in touch with his close friend and religious mentor, Abu Muhammad al-Makdisi. In the years to come, they would begin their sect of strict Islamic law and named the organization the Jabhat al-Tawhid wal-Jihad, which began terrorist operations as the U.S. military invaded the capital of Iraq, Baghdad, in 2003. The U.S. coalition military witnessed unrelenting car bombings, which were a rare occurrence before the invasion of 2003. With the advent of the internet, al-Zarqawi began taking hostages and filming them while being beheaded. These grotesque visuals would influence young jihadis from the Middle East and Southeast Asia to begin the new Jihad of the West in Iraq, and thus al-Zarqawi's group began to grow. The United States had become aware of this new jihadi, whose terrorist bombing campaigns had put him under the light of the world's military might. Al-Zarqawi targeted Shia mosques as well as civilians. United Nations representatives, Iraqi government institutions, Egypt's ambassador, Russian diplomats, and foreign civilians in Iraq, and hotel visitors in Jordan. His relentless campaign of slaughter was now labeling him as public enemy number one, even over the more pronounced bin Laden. On June 7, 2006, al-Zarqawi was killed by a drone strike at a safe house in Bakba. The group was teetering to survive after that. And for the next 3 years, the group was now led by Omar al-Baghdadi. With the Syrian conflict, al-Baghdadi saw promise for a resurgence. With the Syrian jails allowing prisoners, mostly Salafi jihadis, imprisoned by the al-Assad government, the Islamic State in Iraq was now recruiting them to fight against the cursed Shia Alawite regime. The group will once again rename itself in 2011 to the Islamic State in the Levant. It was here in 2011 and 12 that we witnessed the true potential and exponential growth into a transnational threat. Countries such as Iraq, Sudan, Philippines, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Egypt. Al-Baghdadi took full advantage of the Arab Spring. So did the United States Department of State. And in 2011, a covert CIA operation, which was approved by Jordan and Israel, codenamed Timber Sycamore, saw the potential of the Islamic State and began utilizing the CIA to covertly train and fund the organization to help topple the Assad government. Other jihadi groups began to spring up in Syria, such as Jabhat al-Nusra, Abdul Azam Brigades, Ansar al-Sham, Liwa Aqab al-Islami, Fatah al-Islam, and Ansar al-Sharia. Many of these jihadis were foreign fighters from countries mentioned above, as native Syrians caught in the middle were either slaughtered or forced to support these Wahhabi Saudi fundamentalists groups. This would begin to witness some of the most violent acts of morbidity ever seen in the world before. Mass executions, daily beheadings at city squares, and shootings over land, possessions, and other religious indifferences. By 2012, with the death of bin Laden, these groups had started to take their violence toward the Shia minorities left behind in places such as Syria, Iraq, and Libya, where even a terrorist organization such as al-Qaeda had to disassociate themselves from the Islamic State. And in 2014, a video statement from leader Abu Muhammad al-Golani of the Jabhat al-Nusra announced its severing ties with al-Qaeda and changing its name to Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. Al-Qaeda and Egyptian operative Ahmed Hassan Abu al-Qaya al-Masri gave this blessing in a response video days later. Meanwhile, as the Islamic State began to camp in Syria against the orders of Ayman al-Zawahiri and the slaughter of Shiites, al-Zawahiri cut ties with the organization. In an audio message, al-Zawahiri accused ISIS top leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of sedition and insisted the Iraqi terrorist recluse was not the leader of Muslims. Quote, "We preferred to respond with as little as possible, out of our concern to extinguish the fire of sedition, but Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his brothers did not leave us a choice, for they have demanded that all the Mujahideen reject their confirmed pledges of allegiance and to pledge allegiance to them for the claim of a caliphate," end quote. The United States coalition partners saw this as an advantage for breaking up the two groups further by bombing key points, while also using false flag attacks in Syria cities and blaming them on the Assad regime. United States intelligence reports from CIA stations in the Middle East were reporting that the weakening of al-Qaeda, the death of bin Laden, Mohammed Atef, and the capture of top leaders such as Abu Zubaydah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Mustafa al-Hasnawi, and Suleiman Abu Ghaith led the group to lose its financial backing, its structure, and transnational threat. However, it still remained a threat to the Arabian Peninsula and, to an extent, the Indian Peninsula. Ayman al-Zawahiri, with its new emir and his background, is far more extensive than anyone in the terrorist underworld. Saudi Arabia continues to be the primary importer of Wahhabi Salafi-backed terrorism, as its main religious branch of Islam is partly what created it in the first place, Wahhabi, named after its founder, Muhammad ibn Abdul al-Wahhab. Continued funding from the United States and Great Britain of the Saudi Kingdom also perpetuates the expansionism of the tumultuous ideology. United States intelligence and policy analysts, however, continually ignore this anomaly and denounce al-Qaeda as nothing more than a fringe element hardly worth noting. Former CIA Director John Brennan, quote, "The core of al-Qaeda, The group that is now led by Ahmed al-Zawahiri is not what it used to be. But it did take quite a bit of patience and time and a deliberate and focused years-long effort for us to be able to say that we really have taken off the battlefield much of al-Qaeda's capabilities, end quote. But nothing could be further from the truth in regards to al-Qaeda's capabilities. Even after Jabhat al-Nusra had temporarily disassociated from al-Qaeda in 2014, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani swore loyalty to Ayman al-Zawahiri. The group rebranded itself into Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, which suddenly began receiving funding from Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the fall of 2014 and 15, making them a formidable adversary in Syria. As car bombings and terrorist assassinations began taking hold of key spots such as Deir ez-Zor and Damascus. Terrorist groups who al-Qaeda had influenced began taking more prominent roles. Groups such as Abu Syaf in the Philippines, al-Shabaab in East Africa, and al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in Algeria. Groups who al-Qaeda had major influence during the late 1990s and backed by Saudi donors, where certain financing come from the United States Islamic charities and the Muslim World League. These Wahhabi-led groups are in defiance of their governments, who they deemed either kafir or munafiq. The ideological ultra-conservative Wahhabis began taking the fight to the near enemy, as it was declared many years ago by Ahmed al-Zawahiri and Muhammad ibn al-Faraj Zawahiri, who wrote Knights Under the Prophet's Banner, where he described Arab secular governments as the near enemy, with the United States and Israel as the far enemy. With Libya also falling with the death of its antagonist leader, Muammar Gaddafi, the country is currently still under a civil war waged by nationalist groups under Islamic jihadis fighting over meters of land. Al-Qaeda's influence is currently being felt in places such as Tripoli, and less than a month after the death of Gaddafi, the al-Qaeda flag was seen flying off the roof of a courthouse in Benghazi city center. It was later reported that the sporadic foreign intelligence cables that the CIA had dealings with the Islamic Libyan fighting group, led by Abdel Hakim Belhaj, who has long been in conflict with the Gaddafi government since 1998. After the September 11th attacks in the United States, it was Gaddafi who led the aggressive denunciation of the Libyan Islamic fighting group, whom, according to Belhaj, had al-Qaeda members in its group. As of 2018, they were taken off the terrorist watch list. In 2012, Mukhtar Abu al-Zubair, or Godamin, emir of the al-Assad in East Africa, had publicly announced their alliance with al-Qaeda. In an audio recording taken on February 9, 2012, quote, "On behalf of the soldiers and the commanders in al-Assad, we pledge allegiance to you. So lead us to the path of jihad and martyrdom that was drawn by our Imam, the martyr Osama," end quote. The Somalian group was warmed greatly by Ahmed al-Zawahiri, who began sending arrangements to help against the fight against the federal government of Somalia. Al-Qaeda had a previous history in Somalia. It was where the Battle of Mogadishu took place, where militants headed by Mohammed Afara Adid and trained by Mohammed Atef and al-Qaeda back in 1991 and 92. Bin Laden had sought refuge in Khartoum, welcomed by the popular National Islamic Front leader Hassan al-Turabi, when bin Laden was ostracized by the Saudi government. In September 2014, a U.S. drone strike carried out as part of the broader mission called Operation Indian Ocean killed al-Assad leader Ahmed Abdi Godon. The group, however, remained unaffected and even carried out terrorist bombing, such as the September 13th Westgate shopping mall attack, October 14, 2017 Mogadishu bombings, and December 2019 Mogadishu bombings. On September 11, 2019, Ayman al-Zawahiri made an audio message calling for the attacks of U.S., European, Israeli, and Russian military targets. In a 33-minute audio, he exclaimed, quote, "If you want jihad to be focused solely on military targets, the American military has presence all over the world, from the east to the west. Your countries are littered with American bases, with all the infidels therein and the corruption they spread," end quote. The audio was released on the al-Assad website. They are al-Qaeda's media arm. The Islamic State continued to remain somewhat relevant, but their transnational threat to the public may not be what they used to be. However, the internet is the best influence of many of the Wahhabi organizations, and they realize the potential it possesses. The Islamic State still, periodically, publishes propaganda videos, which are received by the poor disenfranchised who reside in Europe and the United States, as they are being manipulated by these Salafi theatrical entrepreneurs who take advantage of these maligned youth. The countries who house these young men, who are being manipulated by groups such as the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, are under a constant threat due to the volatile nature of these groups and their ultimate intentions, which is to overthrow the Crusader Jewish world and replace it with an Islamic caliphate which has no compromise. Meanwhile, as the United States coalition continued to bomb Arab countries in the Middle East, killing hundreds of thousands, based solely on military expansionism and influence from the Saudi-Israeli lobbies, we will create new terrorists to replace the dead ones. As we kill more Arabs and Muslims with our demented view of spreading democracy and conducting a war on terrorism. The irony of conducting such a war is we continually support the main producer of Wahhabi brand terrorism in Saudi Arabia, which has given us the enemy we are currently fighting.